Welcome to the next installation of Tech Talks. This series was founded about a year ago to help with inter-lab collaboration and just professional development. The next installation of Tech Talks will be next week, Thursday, the 19th of December at 10 a.m. where we'll have Meet the Advanced Technology Laboratory, and TJ Brudner will be giving that talk. Today we're going to be talking about human information interaction, and we've invited Dr. Jacek Gwizdka from the School of Information to talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. So I'm from the School of Information at UT, which is also known as iSchool, or the Texas iSchool. My talk has two goals. I would like to talk a little bit about our Information Experience Lab, and then I will talk about selected research, which will be mainly from the perspective of my research projects. So the IX Lab, the Information Experience Lab, is a lab co-directed by my colleague, Professor Randolph Bias, and myself. Our background is mainly in cognitive psychology, experimental psychology, but I also have quite a bit of background in engineering, mainly industrial engineering. So the IX Lab is a research facility and also teaching facility which is dedicated to studying human information interaction. And we do a variety of projects, user studies. Some are the kind of basic usability of various interfaces, websites, and that's very often done by students as a part of their coursework or individual projects, especially by doctoral students. We also study readability, accessibility, searching as learning, and other topics. And I will talk in some more detail about some of the selected topics. Our capabilities in the lab include, so first I should say the setup is a two-room setup. It's a kind of standard usability setup of a usability lab with one room where we test participants, and the second room is for observation with one-way mirror between these rooms. And one of our main technical capabilities is eye tracking with software called iMotions. That is a very generic biometric platform. It is capable of integrating or fusing data from eye tracking, electroencephalography, e.g. galvanic skin response. It also has capability for facial expression recognition and emotion detection. And it can deliver data in real time to some external applications. The main tools that we use, especially that I use in my research, is eye tracking. And the eye tracker that we have is a remote eye tracker. The eye tracker is built into a monitor, which is used to project stimuli. Could be videos, could be websites, any software also. So some of the topics of research projects conducted in our lab include things like cognitive load, information relevance, mind wandering or mindless reading, measuring learning while searching, consumer health information evaluation, real-time eye tracking data for adaptive user interfaces, recognizing artwork from a human perspective and eye movement perspective, very general usability of various software applications, and one other topic was studying human multitasking. And today I would like to talk at some level of detail about projects related to inferring relevance judgments as well as mindless reading. And time permitting, I will also talk about measuring learning while searching online. So these projects represent mainly my research, but they are representative in general of topics that are studied research in our lab. So in my research, my main goal is to characterize and enhance human information interaction, where the interaction is mediated by computing technology. And one specific aspect of my work is real-time assessment of cognitive states of users. And the cognitive states are variety, and they could include different levels of cognitive load, for example. Information relevance judgment, that is when people judge information that is relevant or not relevant to the goals of their task. Assessment of learning, how much people learn during search. Mindless reading, which I already mentioned. And I also dabble a little bit into assessing situation awareness on monitoring tasks. And the data is collected in implicit way, that is without interaction from users, by using various sensors, including already mentioned eye tracking. And kind of the overall end goal is to enhance, whether this is technology on the algorithm side or in terms of design, enhance interaction by personalizing or by adapting systems or the display to users. And so I call it overall using neurophysiological evidence. And the three types of devices that I have used in my research is eye tracking. You'll hear a lot about eye tracking, so I'll be repeating you a lot. But also EEG, electroencephalography, and fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And I already mentioned some of these topics that I study using eye tracking. EEG, I used in studies of cognitive load or mental workload, and also in studies of information relevance judgments, that is using EEG to detect when the judgment takes place. And fMRI I have used in studies of information relevance. Now in the lab, so actually let me go back here. So this picture shows a kind of a high-grade, medical-grade EEG unit on a person. In the lab I have something much simpler. It's kind of consumer-level EEG device with 14 channels. And the mentioned fMRI study that was not done in the lab. It was done previously when I was at Rutgers University, at the Rutgers Brain Imaging Center. So first, I would like to talk about information relevance. This is one of the main topics that I study. And here's a list of publications based on some of which I'm going to talk about this line of research. I will start by defining what is relevance as in information science, information studies. It's one of the most researched topics, but it may be not familiar to the audience here. So starting with a very general definition, relevance is a quality or state of being closely connected or appropriate. In a more moving closer to user interaction, something is relevant to a task if it increases the likelihood of accomplishing the goal of the task. And in information science, relevance has been understood to have multiple dimensions, and some of them is a system relevance, where this is the relation between the query specified by a person and the retrieved information objects by algorithm, or not retrieved if the algorithm doesn't match the way we expect it to match the objects. And topical relevance is another dimension. So this is what the documents are about. So the extent to which the documents match a query expressed or entered by a user. These are this has very much a system flavor. That is, the query is understood that the matching is independent from a user, and it's assumed that it will work for every person. In a more human-centered view, we put more emphasis on users' information need that is expressed by query, but it's not the same as query. Query may be a very poor representation of what the person wants to find in terms of information. And in the human-centered view, we emphasize relevance as a relation. So this is a relation between the person and information, and it arises from the interaction between person, it's his or her goals, and the information. And it's dynamic, it changes because people may learn, they may change, the state of their knowledge will change, and different documents will become relevant to their goals. Why is it of interest? So if we want to improve information retrieval systems, we would like to better understand users' search intents and their needs. And how can we obtain more information from users? One way is by soliciting more feedback. And one of the techniques in information retrieval is explicit relevance feedback, asking people to perhaps highlight or click on some additional keywords in order for the system to better understand what kind of information do they want. It turns out that people are really resistant. They don't want to do this because it requires more mental effort, more time also possibly. So therefore the idea is to use some other signals in an implicit way to better understand what a person needs, what a person wants. And the signals with which I work are the neurophysiological signals. There has been a lot of work where simpler signals such as click streams and the timing of clicks and the time that is spent on documents is used in order to improve the system's inference of what is the person wants to find in terms of information. So I'll talk some level of detail about an experiment, which is a controlled lab study. This actually represents more than one experiment, but the design was the same, with 24 students in one case and about 30 in the second case, where the goal was to indicate by a person which documents are relevant, and it was in a sense which documents answer questions that were shown on screen. The design is such that people saw a series of textual stimuli, one text per screen, with some crosshair in between, and the documents were designed in such a way that they were relevant, that is, they contained the answer to the question, or they were topical, where they were on the same topic, but they didn't contain the answer, and they were irrelevant on a totally different topic. And the topics were all kind of news topics, but they were not recent news, so people were most likely not familiar with these documents. And so this is how it looked. The documents were shown in a series, and when a person was ready to indicate, okay, this is relevant or not relevant, in one study they pressed a button, in another study they actually looked at the corner or bottom corner of screen, and the system recognized that they were ready to move forward. Let me show some example eye movement patterns. So that's one type of document. I will later ask you if you think it's relevant, topical, or irrelevant. That's another example. And here we observe quite different type of reading. But essentially they read every line in this case. jumping around a little bit. And this is the third case. So they also read pretty much everything, but at some point they stop reading. Okay, so if I were to, so these are the three documents that we saw. If I were to ask you which is which, how many people in the audience would say that number one is a relevant document? Topical document? Let's see, maybe 5 hands? More? Okay. Let's say about 10. Irrelevant? Okay, this seems to be majority. Okay, how about number 2? Is it relevant? Okay. Is it topical? Okay. And the last one, is it relevant? Okay. Or is it topical? Okay. Irrelevant? Okay. So this was a little bit split. So I think minority thought it was relevant, and a few people thought it was topical. Could somebody share why did you think that it was, whatever you think? Yes.
Unless I'm misunderstanding, like they're looking for answer, right? And relevant means that they found the answer.
Yes.
Yeah. So they stopped reading when they found the answer for the third one.
Okay.
So I guess. And 2, it's relevance. They were looking for the answer the whole time.
Okay.
But they didn't find the answer, so it was just topical. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought the opposite. You stop reading when I determine it's not relevant, and I'll move on to something else. See, number 3, I was like, look, like by that second paragraph, this isn't relevant. So to me, that maybe why they stopped.
It also depends, of course, what is the location of the answer in the document.
Yeah, that's true.
But you were right.
Smart.
That's what happens. So here they are actually not reading in detail, they are scanning. They are scanning just few words and decide, okay, this is totally off topic. So I'm done. And this seems to be related, but I cannot find the answers. I'm reading everything, and here, when I found, I'm done. So that in terms of the mental effort, or mental workload, if you will, these cases require highest effort because more text needs to be processed by people. What's interesting, one measure that I use from eye tracking is pupil dilation. So eye trackers, especially better ones, also measure pupil, and pupil dilate in response to light, but also in response to certain mental activities, and it tends to change with mental effort, where more effort means that pupils dilate more. And that's the case just before people find answer here, the pupil is dilated. So the overall approach here is to have people possibly first in front of an eye tracker, which is underneath here, and wearing, it's not very well visible, but they're wearing the EEG headset, a simple headset, and then we process this information and use it to additionally infer which of the documents that people are viewing is relevant, or at least more relevant, to their task. And in my study so far, I have done it offline, so I've done it all the data processing after the task is completed. But the goal is to do it at some point in real time and to feed this information possibly back into the system to help retrieve more relevant documents or perhaps suggest more diversity to a person in terms of search results. In one of the studies, in addition to more classic traditional statistical or inferential statistics, we also use machine learning approaches and, for example, classification. And we used well over 500 features from EEG signals and 25 from eye tracking. And this shows kind of in an abstract way a difference in terms of reading when people continue reading on their irrelevant text, which is here at the bottom, and relevant text. And the classification accuracy, even just with eye tracking, gets pretty high into the order of 90% at the point when they are reading relevant words. But overall, at the end, not even focusing on relevant words, the classification accuracy is about 80-some%. So it's actually not bad, and it's quite promising. So to summarize, documents are read in a different way. The eye movements depend on the relevance. What I showed here were relatively simple examples. I have also done experiments on a more open-ended documents where people were free to search on the web anywhere they wanted on a given topic. And similar relationships were found, especially in terms of pupil dilation in the couple seconds before they make a decision that the document is relevant. There was also cognitive effort difference between the irrelevant and processing of relevant documents. And so overall, plausibly, this type of signals can be used in addition to more traditional signals to inform us additionally about the relevance of documents. Another type of research topics I would like to talk about is mind wandering. And this will be mainly based on this paper. So what is mind wandering? In everyday speak, we talk about daydreaming. It affects all of us. And essentially, it's defined as a shift in contents of our thoughts that is away from the task that we are currently engaged in. It could be self-generated thoughts on some other topics. What is for dinner today? And it tends to occur in many different situations. We have periods of mind wandering when we are driving, which can be dangerous. When we are interacting with computers, reading a book or reading a screen, everybody I think can relate to this. And on the average, while reading, it occurs in, what is from experimental studies, it's about 1/4 of, well, it's not of a total time, but I'll explain when I have the experimental design on the slide. It's also called mindless reading in the context of reading tasks. So why is it of interest? It's not necessarily that mind wandering only has negative effects. Of course, it very much depends on what is the task that we are engaged in, where it could be dangerous. But it also may have positive effects, where some thoughts and memories are integrated or additionally processed. But on many tasks, it will have detrimental effects for task performance. Again, in the case of reading, we need to reread, go back to the text again, so it's maybe waste of time, simply said. And so it's interesting if we can detect when a person is mind wandering, and again using possibly eye tracking. So research questions here were which eye tracking measures differ significantly between the cases of mind wandering and not mind wandering. These are the symbols, the acronyms I'm using. And can we use these eye tracking measures to infer when a person is mind wandering? So that was a lab experiment, 30 people. They were all native English speakers and have normal or corrected to normal vision, so that we wanted to make sure that these don't affect how they are reading. And they read several selected texts on a variety of topics. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is one of the screens. What you see here was a kind of a simple simulation of how the ground truth of mind wandering was collected. So there was a prompt shown in random places on screen at random, no, actually it was at the same location but at random time intervals, and people had to respond accordingly, whether they were mind wandering or reading. And a number of different eye tracking based variables were used, and a total of 27, including counts of fixations, regression count. That is, regressions are the eye movement that is against direction of reading, so going back in line, going in the other direction. A variety of measures derived from eye fixation durations. Saccades. So saccades are the quick, very fast eye movements between fixations. They are actually the fastest movements our body is capable of. They go up to 500 degrees of visual angle in 1 second. So it's quite fast, and also relative pupil change. And these measures were tested 5 seconds and 10 seconds before the response to the probes that were shown on screen. And I did some statistical tests and also classification using random forest algorithm. And it turns out that a number of different measures were statistically significantly different between the periods of mind wandering and reading. So here actually let me go back to mention that as expected, approximately 27% of data points collected from these probes were assessed by users as mind wandering. Okay? This has certain implications for classification, which I will mention on the next slide. So the average fixation durations was higher where people were mind wandering. Fixation counts were actually lower when people were mind wandering. And the total fixation duration in this period was higher for non-mind wandering, that is reading, when people were reading. Saccades were generally shorter for mind wandering, whereas the duration of saccades was longer when people were mind wandering. These are results from classification. So one issue is that the data was not balanced because only about 27% of cases were mind wandering periods and the rest was reading. So to improve the balance, there were some additional techniques applied, such as synthetic sampling and also random sampling with replacement. And one way to assess, and simple way to assess the effect of, or the the performance of classification is by looking at accuracy, and we can see here is, it's around 70% when we use the raw data intact, the data without any additional resampling or sampling, and it goes up to about 87-89% when we do this additional, apply these additional techniques. A slightly better measure is actually to assess classification performance of F measure, and here we also can see that overall the performance is actually quite promising. So some of the results that I already mentioned when I was talking about the charts is the longer fixation durations, also the overall higher variability of fixations. And this may be, and also pupil dilation. And this is probably to do with the fact that when we are mind wandering, our fixations are, the duration and other parameters are not related to the characteristics of words, because they are driven by some other thoughts that are not related to the text. There were also some measures that didn't confirm previously obtained results. We didn't find any difference in regression results, that is the regressive eye movement. This could be because of relatively homogeneous group of participants, or because of specific texts that were used for our study. But overall here, again, eye tracking seems to be quite promising in terms of providing features or measures that can be used to infer periods of mind wandering and not mind wandering. The last research topic that I would like to mention is search as learning, and I will do it quickly or quicker in the interest of time. The slides that I'm going to use actually mostly come from my doctoral students, Nilabra, so I want to acknowledge this. So, what is learning? Of course, this is a big topic in itself, and what I'm showing here is one of the better known taxonomies, so-called Bloom's taxonomy, where this pyramid shows different levels of learning, from a relatively simple level, remembering and understanding, to more extensive, more involved levels of learning that include applying what we learned, analyzing, evaluating the new knowledge that we are gaining, comparing with previous knowledge, and creating, so generating new knowledge at the top. And in this research, our goal was to we were focusing on the lower levels of this taxonomy, essentially at the bottom level, remembering. And the question was, can we infer changes in verbal knowledge, that is acquiring new words, new vocabulary, using eye tracking and some other measures including interaction with the search system, with the websites on which people were looking for information. Measuring learning is not trivial. There are numerous methods. Very often they have to be catered to specific knowledge. So the questions that are used to test the learning have to be created specifically for different topics, for different documents, for example, that people are from which people are learning. That can be time-consuming, and it's not easy. Another way is to ask people to write in a free form short essay, and then the essay is scored. That is more general in the sense that we don't need to create specific questions. However, scoring essays is, again, it's not straightforward. There are other approaches where people are asked to draw concept maps, show relationships between different concepts that they have learned. They have been used effectively, but again, scoring such topics is such drawings, concept maps, is not straightforward. Yeah, I already mentioned drawbacks. So one of the objectives here was to explore a domain independent way of scoring a change in knowledge at this very basic level. This is at the level of vocabulary change. And also examine if there are differences in eye tracking measures that are related to changes in knowledge level. Here, meaning the knowledge level change means change in vocabulary, so knowing some new words. And that was a study in the lab, 30 participants who were asked to search on the web. They could search anywhere. Only starting point was provided for them, and they were assigned 2 topics on health-related topics. Okay, I'm going to go through this quickly. And the topics that I just mentioned, that the topics were created in such a way, or that the questions that were prompts for their task were created in such a way that they were complex and involved several aspects. So for example, one of the topics was about using vitamin A, and they were asked to find information on the dosage, on the health benefits, consequences of excess of deficiency, and sources, good food sources for vitamin A. The procedure involved first assessing memory span, that is the working memory capacity, because we had hypothesis that people at different levels will perform differently. Because topics were related to health, we also tested online health literacy using a common instrument called eHealth. And then there was training task for them so that they get familiar with the overall setup of the system. And then they performed 2 search tasks. The order was counterbalanced, and it was within subject study, which means that each participant performed all of these tasks. And at the end, we measured perceived workload by using NASA TLX, the task load index, which is essentially a questionnaire with 6 questions with a Likert scale. So the system was using Google for search in the background, but there was a custom search engine results page, that is the page on which search engine results are displayed. And the reason for doing so was to have control over what type of results are sent to them. So we removed PDF files and videos. There was only what we could think is textual results, and also to limit the number of results to 7, so that eye tracking could be done in more detail, so that we could track eyes at the level of individual lines of search results. The text was larger than in a typical Google search engine results page. And yeah, so the results were at the beginning, this font size was increased, and so on. And also we removed ads that may appear in search results. So to measure the change in their vocabulary knowledge, they were asked to generate freely keywords on the topic of search before and after task. So they were entering in an empty text box the keywords. And then, so this was change in knowledge at this low level of remembering, and that was what we were then relating to changes in their interaction, as well as to changes in the measures derived from eye tracking. So we had knowledge change as a measure, and I will explain some of the specific measures that we have used. Eye tracking measures and search interaction, that is the web pages they open and so on. And our unit of analysis was user and task. So one simple measure of knowledge change was number of keywords they entered after compared with what they entered previous, and it was a relative measure. So what was the ratio of change of keywords that they entered, essentially. More sophisticated knowledge change measures involved measuring semantic similarity between the keywords entered by our participants and the expert knowledge. And the expert knowledge was collected by using mechanical Turk, so Amazon Mechanical Turk system, and then it was verified by medical doctor, so that we had some trust or higher trust in this set of keywords. And we calculated ratio of change between the semantic similarity before the task and after the task, and also simple difference. And one other measure was not comparing the semantic similarity ratios or difference from before to after in comparison with experts, but comparing the post-task keyword list with the keyword list generated by expert in the described previously process. You have already seen some of these images that people read differently depending on the rate of relevance. But behind this, actually, what I'm using for processing eye tracking data here is a way of labeling eye fixations so that I can distinguish when people are reading in line continuously and when they're scanning. And so the cognitive processes behind reading and scanning are different, so we want to distinguish them, and we hypothesize that people learn new words when they find something that is of interest, in focus for them. So we only consider the reading fixations in this from this data set. We don't use scanning fixations. And some of the measures are the same that I mentioned previously in other research, counts of fixations, durations, and various derived statistics. Also the length of reading sequences in pixels screen, and so regression counts, so how much people were moving their eyes backwards, and the length of regressions also, so how far and how many times they do this. The search interactions include relatively simple things, which are essentially, this is the data that is server side, or could be. This is the data that is available to search engine companies easily. So web pages that were visited, how many of different types possibly of web pages, queries, how many words, and then we also looked at reformulations of queries. And additionally, we processed the query words to measure how specialized were the words. So the hypothesis is that if somebody learns more of a new vocabulary, their queries will be more specialized. They will be using, for example, so they will be using more specialized words. And here are two examples. So in a less specialized is cure for low blood pressure, and more specialized is Mayo Clinic hypotension treatment. Where hypotension is the term probably not known to general public. hypertension, but not hypotension. I may ask actually the audience, how many people know what hypotension is? Okay. So data analysis involved grouping our participants into low group and high group according to the different knowledge change measures. So we created a number of different groups because we had different measures of knowledge change. Overall, these groups, there was a high overlap between these groups. So this gave us some level of confidence that our measures tap into the change of vocabulary knowledge, no matter which measure we use. And then for these different measures, we looked at the difference between the eye tracking and the search interaction measure. And we did it also for the last knowledge change measure that I mentioned, which is comparing our participants' post-task vocabulary list, the self-generated keywords, with the expert vocabulary list. So essentially there were 4 different low and high groups created in this way. So in summary, what we found is that the low groups, and that I will be generalizing because this pretty much applies to all different knowledge change measures, they read more, yet according to our knowledge change measures, they learned less. So most possibly, this means that they were less able to acquire new information, to acquire new vocabulary. The low people on the final knowledge comparison with experts, they spent more time reading search engine results pages, but they actually opened fewer relevant results. So this means that they put their effort, they didn't put effort on the reading specific documents from which they would read more of new words, as we could hypothesize and test further in another study. The low group used less specialized words in their queries, but somewhat possibly surprisingly, the low group reported lower mental workload after the tasks. What was not expected is that we have not found any differences between the low and high groups in terms of overall how many total number of pages visited, and on their online health literacy scores, and also in terms of working memory capacity. Okay, so that was the search as learning, which is one of the continuing research topics in the lab. And I want to mention on one slide one other type of research in which I'm kind of dabbling a little bit at least, and that is using eye tracking to assess situation awareness. And here these images are from simulated, from driving simulation software, and the intuition is that to effectively scan visual field, we cannot be staring just in one point ahead of our car. We also should not be moving our eyes everywhere, because we'll be possibly distracted too much and not paying attention sufficiently to the central area. But probably somewhere in between, where we are scanning the mirror, occasionally the front view, and maybe moving our eyes to the side. So such differences in terms of transitions between different areas of visual field can be assessed by creating transition matrix and calculating one of the metrics, for example, entropy, where this is a very high entropy, this will be low, and this is somewhere in the middle. So the intuition is to use this data in real time and to have a gauge like this, where in the middle, probably somewhere, there is a sweet spot where the performance is actually right on the track, and this is what to be expected. Okay. I didn't mention any funding agencies for these projects, but the funding came from different places, including Google Faculty Awards, Institute for Museums and Library Studies, internal funding at the university, and this last project funding was from Lockheed Martin. So on this, I would like to end, and I'm happy to take any questions.